Hello, welcome back. So today I was thinking it's been a while since I had a video, and it's the nature of my job. It's the busy season. I'm a chef, so of course, restaurant work is like the busiest time of the year is the holidays because that's when everyone is out celebrating, having their holiday parties, doing all that kind of stuff. Um, so, on top of that, I had family staying with me for the last 2 weeks, which is just like, you know, love my family, love I could love a person an infinite amount, but after so many days of being in my space and like me being kind of like thrown out of my routine and stuff, I was ready to have my space back, and now I have it. So I'm recording today. But when I was thinking about what decks I wanted to do videos of and that kind of thing, it occurred to me that I never really outlined sort of the goal of what I wanted the content of the channel to be, or like why I like tarot in the first place. So I thought today I would kind of talk a little bit about why I like the tarot, and then what kind of decks I look for when I am, combing through eBay and different sites and things, and then how the channel kind of developed into, or how it like came to be, and also like the name of the channel. I think is would be fun to kind of tell you the backstory because it's kind of a funny story. So, the reason that I chose Moon Baby is because I worked with a server who was, she was older than pretty much everyone else. Yeah, I think she was our oldest employee. Certainly, like, beyond 15 years older than everyone else. And anytime anyone complained, whined, griped, anything like that, anything kind of like sort of besides presenting that you were happy and doing great, she would tell them, don't be a moon baby. And so it kind of had a negative connotation, but I loved it because I have always been into astrology and like tarot, spiritual things. So I embraced it and really loved it, and I ended up using it. I kind of do baking on the side as well, and I use that name for like all of my business cards and that kind of stuff. So then when I decided to do a YouTube channel, I was like, I'm going to use it for that too because it just like, it works well for the space and for what it is. So, yeah, so that's how the name came about. I turned a sort of negative little phrase into something fun that's mine. So next, I guess I'll outline like how I go about finding decks. The thing is, I consider myself a tarot deck collector, but I also use them. A lot of times you'll hear people talking about when they think of like a tarot collector, they think of someone who's just like trying to find a rare deck, or just wants to have as many decks as possible, and that's not necessarily the case. So basically what happens is as I'm searching for decks, other decks are suggested, or I come across weird decks, and I write them down. And so I do have an ever growing list of decks that I am interested in, and that I want. But that isn't necessarily like, I'm not necessarily the kind of person who only wants my number one deck. Like, I sometimes buy decks that are not even on my list because I see them, I want it, the price is right, so I'll just grab it then. I don't even worry about what decks I've wanted longer or how long I've waited for another one. That doesn't matter to me. Um, so I have always been a very sentimental kind of person, bordering on pack rat. I have gotten way better with decluttering and not holding on to stuff as long, but I really love reminiscing. And like, I have a wine crate in my spare room that is just tons of like little family trinkets and like yearbooks and things that I have taken from my parents' house while they're on vacation or out of town or when I know they're not home, because I really love them and I want to make sure that I have them. So often I'll get a call from my mom and she'll be like, "Hey, do you have Mimi's cookbook? Because I'm looking for it and I don't have it." And I'll be like, "I'll check my box. Hold on, I'll get back to you." So that's just the kind of person I am. I'm very sentimental. I think that's what draws me to these decks that are out of print. And even though they don't seem that old, I sometimes think of them as historical, even though when I say historical, I know there are people who are going to be watching who are thinking like the Solabuska and like though that sort of historical, like actual historical, like original tarot decks. But to me, all decks are historical because they're all a part of history. And they all have a story, and they all approach the tarot with a little different point of view or perspective. And that is the part that is interesting to me, is seeing the differences in all of these decks. It's fun to see the difference in decks that are put out around the same time period, like all the 80s decks, all the 70s decks, because they're, especially in the 80s, the decks are like very different. All of them. There are some that are kind of like similar collage, but like I think it's fun to look at that kind of stuff. And so that's how I collect. There are certain kinds of decks that I do collect or that I look for more than others, like specifically the Yellow Box, US Games, Rider-Waite-Smith deck. I am constantly looking at those. I have no problem. If the price is right, I will just grab it. It's not a big deal. Any RWS type clone or anything like that, I'm very much interested in those, so I grab those when I see them. And then other than that, it's just decks that catch my eye, that I'm interested in, that I want to give a shot, give a try, see how they work for me, see what the art is like, see what the card stock is like. For me, it's a very tactile thing. It's a lot of like holding it, feeling it, shuffling it, looking through it. And I like to do that over and over, and I like to go and grab a new deck every now and then and just like open it up and look at it because it makes me happy and it's fun. But what I found myself doing it mostly started when I would find things on eBay, because I would win the auction or I would buy it and it would just look interesting to me, but I wouldn't know a lot about it. I would see a couple of images of the cards, but like I didn't always see even that. Sometimes it would just be the box that looked cool, and I would just get it, and that was it. And so I found myself doing research on the deck, like when it was produced, who illustrated it, who wrote the book, who published it, what was that publishing house's deal, like what did they normally publish versus, this. And so I ended up with like lots of little loose leaf pages of like notes on different decks, diagrams, I mean, all sorts of little loose papers. And I would just keep them in a folder, or sometimes they would just get lost. But it was information that I found really interesting and really fun and really cool. And it's part of tarot decks that is kind of unexplored and not really talked about a ton, are the actual creators. And so when I decided to make a YouTube channel, I thought it would be beneficial for me and beneficial for other people who are interested in that kind of thing like I am. So for me, it's beneficial because all of my notes would be contained within a video with a walkthrough of the deck. So it would be sort of like a little library for myself. I could go and pick any deck that I was looking for, relearn about it if I wanted to, or reference it, and I wouldn't have to worry about a physical stack of papers somewhere, like, or a filing system of some sort. Like, I don't need a Dewey Decimal System for my tarot collection. Like, I would just like to be able to kind of like see them and see the information I wanted to know, because some of it is really cool information that I'm glad that I know, but that I'm not necessarily going to remember. Truly, I'm not. But I think it's fun when I go and grab that deck to be able to like reference it again and get excited about that deck and the creator. And I think it's important not to forget about the creator. And lots of times, some of these decks I've come across, the artists and or the people who write the guidebooks are still living, and that is like even cooler to me, because it's like I'm holding a piece of like tarot history and the creator of that is still living. Like, to me, that would be the equivalent of being alive when the original Rider-Waite-Smith deck came out, and like having been around Pamela Coleman Smith or Arthur Edward Waite. Like, that's just a cool, interesting thing. And hopefully one day I'll have kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews who are interested in this kind of stuff too, and then they'll have a reference point to be able to go and check it out and see, oh, Uncle Brant has this deck, let's go check and see what it's all about. Like, so yeah, that is the story of Moon Baby, and it's what makes me tick. I do tend to like out of print decks and decks that are older. If I can get, even if a deck's in print, if I can get an original edition of it or an older edition of it, I would rather that almost every time. Mostly because the cardstock is better, and there's just something about that smell. It smells like a library, or I don't know how to describe it. And the feel of it is just different and better. So I do tend to like older decks. That being said, there are decks, lots of decks in my collection that are indie, new decks. I don't tend to buy mass market new. I mean, there are exceptions, obviously. But for the most part, if I get a deck that's new, it's an indie deck or a Kickstarter or Really, that's the only two ways that I've gotten them. Um, and I tend to use the indie and the newer ones, honestly, to read for myself more day to day. And the older decks, it isn't that I wouldn't do a reading with it or I don't do a reading with it, but I'm less likely to pull it out and do a reading. But at the same time, they do get used, and I do really enjoy just going and seeing my collection and pulling out a deck and exploring it again and looking at the pictures and noticing things that I haven't noticed before. Um, yeah, so on my channel, you can expect videos that are sort of like my little book reports that I have done already at the beginning, and then full flip throughs of almost all of my decks, because most of them I've not seen a full flip through of at all. Um, so, yeah, that's what you can look forward to. And thanks for sticking around and indulging me in this little YouTube venture. And yeah, so thanks.